this webinar and come back and say, hey, I'd like to get a quote on some outsourced testing. That would be a great outcome from my point of view, but I recognize that is it's certainly not going to be true of all of you that you'd want that. And some of you might choose to go off and get a bid from somebody else, and well, of course, we prefer to do the business for you. I think that's preferable than if you just say, well, I'm not going to worry about this. We don't need to have any sort of independent testing, and we'll just rely on the acceptance testing when these developers hand it back to us, and they better be good enough. Well, think about what testing in the ideal case does. If you have testing fully integrated into the life cycle, it can do a lot of good gatekeeping and early warnings type of stuff. Think about a good team of testers going through a requirement specification and identifying untestable, ambiguous requirements that might or might not get the attention they deserve from the development organization. That can prevent a pretty serious train wreck, and it's not always the case that the development organization would point those out as effectively or as early as it would. Now, why not? Why couldn't an outsource development organization do this? Well, you have to have the right people with the right skills involved in testing, and this includes the management of it. And is there really a career path to foster those kind of skills and expertise within the outsourced development organization? This is a question that you have to ask. A lot of these organizations will say, oh yeah, well, we have a testing practice. Okay, but what is that really? Is it a parking lot for junior people when they come in or they have to cut their teeth? Is it a parking lot for people whose careers have stalled within the organization? Well, what's the relative training budget per year, annualized training budget per individual within that testing practice compared to a corresponding developer, right? And these are things you'd have to look at to be able to decide whether an organization was actually serious about testing or whether this was just something they kind of also had in their portfolio. You have to have equipment, tools, infrastructure, all those sort of things. It's testing can be quite an expensive endeavor. I mean, I remember working in a compatibility test lab early in my career, and we had this enormous library of hardware and software that was available for use, and that's not the kind of thing that can be easily replicated. A test team needs to be able to adapt to the project, adapt to the organization, and some of these development teams might or might not be able to, or development outsourcing companies might or might not be able to do that, depending on how rigidly they adhere to something like, say, CMM or CMMI. You also have a need to get really straight facts about what the test results are. And so there's a real risk in when you let the outsourced development company do the testing as well, that editing and self-editing will occur. Now, by self-editing, what I mean is that the group of people who are testing the software that's been developed by their colleagues might choose to not report certain things or to delay the reporting of certain things in an effort to avoid embarrassing those colleagues or to avoid the career implications that might result from them embarrassing their colleagues, particularly if the testing practice, as it were, is seen as organizationally below the development practice from a totem pole type of thing, pecking order within the organization, the hierarchy. And the editing part means that unless you deal with the self-editing and you've got direct access to the test managers, there's a real good possibility that even to the extent that the test manager feels empowered to tell the straight truth, they might be having to pass that information through somebody who's called an engagement manager or something like that, who then very well might choose to water down is a strong word, but to to act on things in a way that was more consistent with the interests of the outsourced development company than with the interests of the client. And that sounds like I'm saying making a serious ethical charge, but as those of you, all of us experience in the real world know that there can be some real shades of gray there, and to the extent that you can adopt a position within that shade of gray that's more beneficial to the outsourced development company, you would expect them to do so. So, it's really risky. We see this happen. It's really risky that organizations assume that the development company that they've sent this work to can and will test competently. And by testing competently, I mean all of those things that I've just discussed. And also, another risky assumption that I mentioned before is that the acceptance testing will suffice to prevent some sort of disaster. So there's this sort of macho kind of, well, when they hand it off to us, we're going to run an acceptance test, and God help them if all those tests don't pass. I've heard that rhetoric, but I've never actually seen that action when the acceptance tests don't pass. What instead I have seen happen is a crisis mentality that, oh my God, we've got to rescue this thing. And at that point, people have too much invested in the project and oftentimes too much invested politically in the outsourcing development organization's success itself, because people have said, oh yeah, we're going to make this work, to actually take the outsource organization out over these kind of things. Say, you're fired. You did not meet the acceptance criteria. You've proven incompetent. Off you go. In some cases, the organization simply can't do that, because while they might contractually have a gun to the outsourced development organization's head, in the sense of they could refuse to pay or do clawbacks or something like that, the outsourced development organization, in effect, has a gun to the client's head too, because the client needs that software, and now is faced with the choice of either figuring out how to make this work in some way or another, or not getting that software in the foreseeable future, which is often unacceptable. So you really put yourself into a very dangerous and untenable situation when you run those risks, because of the likelihood and impact associated with those two risks are both very high. So as I mentioned, the conflict of interest issue comes up here when you have people who are testing their own work, or maybe not testing their own work, but in charge of hiring the test partner who's going to do the work. It's the independence issue, the editing and self-editing problems, the different perspectives, the different set of assumptions. The financial incentives can be problematic. In the sense that people feel that their financial incentives are best served by not finding bugs, and of course you want anybody engaged in testing to have a bug-finding mentality. Now, I'm not saying don't do acceptance testing. I was mentioning before, acceptance testing is not enough, is not going to work. Acceptance testing is necessary. You are going to have to do it, and you should do a thorough job of it. But remember that if the acceptance test fails, you're going to be faced with a number of unpalatable options. So I would say evaluate your different options in terms of independent test labs, independent testing service providers. Obviously, we provide that service, but there are a lot of others that do as well. And getting some bids on this as part of your outsourcing of development is, I think, a very good option. It'll